The wind howled through the narrow cobblestone streets of the ancient town of Vadres, carrying with it a chill that seemed unnatural, even for the cold spring nights of 1824. Lanterns flickered in the gentle gusts, casting shadows that danced along the walls of the half-crumbling stone houses, as if the town itself were alive and breathing. In the distance, the spire of the old cathedral rose against the moonlight, a silent sentinel watching over the sleeping town. Yet a sense of unease hung in the air, thick and heavy like the fog creeping along the streets. In one of the larger, more decrepit homes near the central square, a group of townsfolk had gathered for what was meant to be a modest celebration of the spring festival. Their faces were bright with smiles, the warm glow of candles reflecting in their eyes. But even amidst laughter and chatter, there was an unspoken tension. They whispered about the legend of Sans and a symbol carved into stones, scattered across the old town ruins, said to bring misfortune or death to those who dared to disturb its sanctity. Some scoffed at the idea, dismissing it as superstition, while others avoided looking at the crumbling walls where faint markings were still visible, a reminder of the old times when the town had been ruled by unseen powers and secret societies that spoke in whispers and shadows. Johann, a young blacksmith's apprentice, found himself at the edge of the gathering, his eyes fixed on a large stone in the corner of the yard. On it, etched faintly, was the strange symbol of San. It was angular, intricate, and unfamiliar, yet somehow eerily commanding attention. He felt a shiver run down his spine as he remembered the stories his grandmother had told him, tales of entire families disappearing when they were careless or greedy around the symbol. Yet he was drawn to it, compelled to trace the markings with his fingers. As his skin brushed the cold stone, a sudden gust of wind seemed to envelop him, and the faintest whisper brushed his ears, a word he couldn't understand but which sounded like a warning. The night grew darker, and shadows stretched unnaturally across the festival grounds. The music, a lively tune from fiddlers, seemed to warp with the wind, turning joyful notes into something haunting. People began to sense the change, a creeping dread that made their conversations falter. Some said they saw figures moving between the buildings, but when they blinked, the shadows were gone. An uneasy murmur passed through the crowd, and slowly, families began to retreat toward their homes, guided by the faint lamplight. But it was too late for some. As Johann turned to follow the others, he noticed a figure standing near the edge of the square, cloaked in dark fabric, its face obscured by a hood. The figure did not move like the townsfolk. It stood unnaturally still, and yet Johann felt its gaze pierce through him, a presence that seemed to drain warmth from the air. The figure's hand lifted slightly, pointing toward the stone of San, and Johann felt an almost magnetic pull, a force compelling him to step closer. His heart pounded, but curiosity, or perhaps fate, overpowered fear. Suddenly, the air was split by a scream, high-pitched and desperate, echoing through the emptying street. Lights flickered violently in the houses, and a few brave souls ran toward the sound, only to find nothing but the cold, empty street. The whispers of sand seemed louder now, threading through the panic, and the cloaked figure had vanished as if it had never existed. Yet Johann knew it had been there. The feeling of eyes upon him lingered, and the stone seemed to pulse under his fingers, as if alive. The first disappearance occurred moments later. Henrik, the baker, had been walking home with his young daughter, when he vanished without a sound. 1 second he was there, the next the fog seemed to swallow him whole. The girl screamed, but the street remained silent, save for the wind moaning through the broken shutters. Panic spread like wildfire. Families ran in every direction, banging on doors calling for help. But every corner of the town seemed to shift, alleys twisting unnaturally, trapping them within the labyrinthine streets. Johann tried to gather his wits, dragging himself to the safety of the cathedral step. There, he found the priest, Father Armand, praying fervently, muttering old chants in a language Yuhan didn't recognize. The priest's eyes widened when he saw Yuhan approach. "San has awakened," he whispered, voice trembling. "The curse. It seeks the reckoning. It was promised centuries ago." Yuhan stared, unsure whether the priest's words were madness or truth. Around them, more people had vanished, leaving behind only faint, eerie echoes of their final cry. The streets grew silent except for the wind, which now carried faint whispers, almost chanting, echoing off the stones in rhythms that seemed both chaotic and deliberate. Yuhan stumbled through the alleys, trying to remember the paths his grandmother had warned him about, secret passages, hidden courtyards, forgotten tunnels. The town felt alive, as if it were reshaping itself to keep its victims trapped. Every corner he turned seemed to extend infinitely, shadows twisting into forms that resembled the missing townsfolk, or perhaps his imagination. Fear clawed at him, but he pressed on, guided by some inner instinct, perhaps the same that had drawn him to the stone of San. Hours passed, though Yuhan could not tell, the night stretching endlessly. At one point he came across a small courtyard, overgrown with weeds and littered with broken remnants of past generations. In the center was a fountain, long dry, and etched into its stone was another San symbol, larger and more elaborate than the first. Around it lay the remains of those who had ventured here before him, shattered clothing, discarded trinkets, signs of struggle, yet no body. The air here was heavy, saturated with an oppressive sense of judgment, and Yuhan understood, with a shiver that ran deeper than cold, that this place was a trap, a gathering point for those marked by San. As he pondered his next move, a soft rustle came from behind the fountain. Yuhan froze, gripping a broken branch for protection. The rustle grew louder, and from the shadows emerged a figure, a young woman, her eyes wide with terror, clothes torn, but alive. She whispered a name. "San, it watches everything." Her voice faltered, and she collapsed to the ground, exhausted from fleeing. Yuhan helped her up, and together they tried to make sense of what had happened. The town had been emptied, the streets now alien landscapes of fear and magic, and they realized that surviving alone was impossible. The whispers grew stronger, surrounding them now, speaking directly into their minds in a language older than the town itself. Yuhan felt his strength drain. As the meaning became clearer, San was no mere symbol. It was a force ancient and sentient, demanding reckoning. The events of the past centuries, blood spilled, secrets buried, debts unpaid, were converging in this night of horror, and only those who could confront the truth and the darkness behind San would see dawn. Exhausted but driven, Yuhan and the woman began moving again, searching for others, or perhaps an escape. Each alleyway, each shadowed corner seemed to stretch, to deceive, to whisper their fears aloud. And in the distance, a bell tolled once, deep and resonant, marking an hour that made no sense in human terms. A toll that seemed to shake the town itself. Somewhere beyond the walls of Valdres, hidden from mortal eyes, the watchers of San observed, patient and eternal, ready to claim the night's reckoning. Yuhan realized then that the night had only begun, and the terror of San was far from over. Every decision, every step forward, would be a gamble against something ancient, relentless, and intelligent. The legend was true, more real and horrifying than anyone had dared imagine. And in the heart of the darkness, he understood a truth that chilled him to the bone. Surviving the night might not mean escaping, but merely becoming part of the story that San demanded to be told. The chill of the night clung to Yuhan and the young woman as they stumbled through the winding streets of Valdres, each step echoing unnaturally against the stone walls. The fog had thickened, curling around corners, and through alleyways like living fingers, and the distant tolling of the bell reverberated in Yuhan's chest, with every beat of his heart. The woman's name, he learned, was Leora, a weaver from the edge of town, and her eyes reflected the same terror he felt, a mixture of disbelief and raw primal fear. They moved cautiously, whispering to each other, yet even their soft words seemed swallowed by the oppressive silence that had settled over the town. Every shadow seemed to pulse, every whisper in the wind twisting into words that were almost understandable, as though the very air carried fragments of the curse. They reached a narrow bridge that arched over the frozen canal, its stones slick with ice and frost. Yuhan paused, feeling the weight of the town's history pressing down upon him. Across the bridge, faint glimmers of light flickered as if beckoning them forward, but Yuhan knew better than to trust anything in Valdres tonight. The stories of the symbol San were not mere superstition. He recalled his grandmother's warning: do not follow the lights that appear when the air is still and the shadows long, for those lights are eyes, and eyes watch for the living. He shivered, the memory vivid against the fear clawing at his chest. As they stepped cautiously onto the bridge, a sudden movement caught Leora's attention. A figure darted across the far end of the canal, vanishing into the fog as if swallowed whole. She gasped, clutching Yuhan's arm, and he felt her fingers tremble. It's one of them, she whispered. One of the shadows. They move with San's will. Yuhan swallowed hard, his mind racing to make sense of her words. The shadows had always been part of the tales, creatures that appeared at the edges of vision, stalking those who had been marked by the symbol. Until tonight, he had never imagined they could be real. They hurried across the bridge, careful not to slip on the ice, and entered a cluster of buildings that once belonged to the town's merchant class. The doors hung crooked on their hinges, and windows were shattered or boarded up, the remnants of lives long abandoned. The atmosphere inside was suffocating, thick with dust, rot, and something Yuhan could not name, but instinctively recognized as malevolent. In the corner of a darkened hall, he glimpsed another San symbol, carved deep into the wood, ancient and worn, yet unmistakable. Its edges seemed to glint in the faint light, almost as though it were aware of their presence. Leora's voice broke the silence. We can't stay here. We have to keep moving. Her tone was firm, but her eyes betrayed exhaustion and fear. Yuhan nodded. But where can we go? The town. It's changing. It's not the same as before. He took a deep breath, trying to calm the surge of panic rising in his chest. Every instinct screamed at him to flee blindly, but the memories of the missing townsfolk and the eerie remnants of the courtyard pulled him back to reality. Survival would require clarity, not blind haste. They pressed on, moving from building to building, the fog curling around their legs like cold fingers, whispering in voices they could almost understand. Occasionally they would hear a scream, sharp and desperate, carried on the wind, only to vanish before they could locate its source. Each sound left them more on edge, and every empty street felt like a trap. Yuhan realized that the town itself had become a maze, reshaped by some intelligence older than memory, and that each wrong turn could be fatal. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. It was impossible to tell. Time seemed to distort in Valdres, each moment stretching endless. They stumbled into what appeared to be the remnants of the old town square, where a massive statue had once stood. Now it was broken, toppled by centuries of neglect, but its base bore a massive San symbol, intricately carved, and nearly pulsing with a dim, unnatural light. Yuhan stepped closer, compelled by a mixture of fear and curiosity, and Leora grabbed his arm to stop him. Don't touch it, she pleaded. It will know you are here. Ignoring her, Yuhan traced the carving with his fingers, and the moment his skin made contact, the ground beneath them trembled, the fog swirled violently, and the shadows deepened, coalescing into shapes that were vaguely human, yet grotesquely elongated, their forms writhing as if alive. From the mist, the whispers became voices, chanting in a tongue that seemed older than the stones themselves. The air pressed down upon them, heavy and suffocating, and Yuhan felt his knees weaken. Leora clutched his arm tightly, fear radiating from her in waves. One of the shadowed forms stepped forward, and Yuhan could now see it with horrifying clarity. Its face was obscured by the darkness, yet its eyes burned with an unnatural light, fixed upon him with a focus that made him feel exposed and insignificant. It spoke, though not in words. Yuhan could comprehend, a vibration that resonated through his bones, warning and threatening simultaneously. He understood the meaning instantly. The curse of San had marked them, and the night was far from over. Panicking, they ran, darting through alleys that twisted impossibly, the town's geography betraying logic and reason. Every corner revealed another shadow,
another whispering presence, and they realized that the night was alive, watching and responding to their fear. Yuhan's mind raced, searching for a plan, a way to survive. He recalled the tunnels beneath the old cathedral that his grandmother had mentioned, hidden passages used centuries ago by those seeking to escape judgment or persecution. If the legends were true, it might be their only chance. They reached the cathedral, its massive doors closed and unwelcoming. Yuhan pushed with all his strength, and after several desperate moments, the doors creaked open. Inside, the air was cold, tinged with incense and decay. The nave stretched into darkness, and the shadows of sand symbols were etched into the stained glass windows, faint but unmistakable. It was a place of supposed sanctuary, yet Yuhan could feel the curse pressing against the walls, alive and moving quietly. They navigated the cathedral's interior, following the instructions his grandmother had imparted. Secret panels, hidden stairways, and passages obscured by centuries of dust and neglect. Every step was a gamble, for the whispers grew louder, now seemingly coming from inside the walls themselves, guiding or misleading them. They descended into the lower crypts, damp and musty, where stone coffins lined the walls. Faint carvings of the sand symbol were everywhere, each one imbued with an aura that Yuhan could feel pressing against his soul. In the deepest chamber of the crypt, they found remnants of those who had once dared to oppose or evade the curse. Ancient journals, bones and relics littered the floor. Yuhan leafed through the journals, reading frantic scrawls describing encounters with the shadows, disappearances, and cryptic warnings about the sand curse. One entry stood out, a message from a long-dead priest, warning of the night when the curse would awaken fully, consuming the town, and claiming all who dared remain. Yuhan and Leora exchanged glances, the gravity of their situation sinking in fully. They were in a battle against something beyond human understanding, ancient, patient, and relentless. Hours blurred as they waited in the crypt, listening to the distant moans and whispers above. Yuhan tried to piece together what he knew. The curse of San was no longer dormant. The symbols, the shadows, the disappearances, they were all part of a reckoning that had been set in motion centuries ago. They had survived the initial horrors of the town, but survival in Valdres was never certain, and the night stretched endlessly, a living nightmare that sought to engulf them both. Suddenly, a faint sound echoed from the passage above, a soft scraping, deliberate and rhythmic. Yuhan and Leora froze. The sound grew closer, and then unmistakably, footsteps descended the stairs into the crypt. They held their breath, hearts pounding, as a figure emerged from the shadows, clad in tattered robes, face hidden. The figure's presence radiated authority and menace. In its hand was a staff, etched with the sand symbol, and its eyes glowed with the same unnatural light Yuhan had seen in the shadows outside. "You have entered the heart of sand," the figure intoned, voice resonating through the chamber. Few survived the night. Fewer still understand the judgment that awaits. Yuhan and Leora backed away, unsure if fleeing would save them, or hasten their doom. The figure advanced, slow and deliberate, and the shadows in the crypt seemed to ripple and shift in response. It was clear now that the curse was not merely a force of chance. It was governed, directed, and aware, and the night was far from over. Yuhan clenched his fists, gripping the branch he had carried, and whispered to Leora, we survive no matter what." Her nod was barely visible in the gloom, but determination shone in her eyes. Together they faced the figure, aware that the trials of San were only beginning, and that their journey through terror, revelation, and survival had just crossed the threshold of true horror. The night had claimed much, but it had not claimed them yet, and somehow they had to endure until the dawn or die trying.
The chamber in the cathedral crypt seemed to stretch endlessly, shadows clinging to the corners like living things. Johann and Elora held their ground, every muscle tensed, eyes fixed on the robed figure whose presence radiated a cold, suffocating authority. The staff in its hand glowed faintly with the symbol of sand pulsing with a rhythm that felt alive. The air itself seemed heavy, saturated with an invisible pressure that made each breath a struggle. The whispers that had haunted them throughout the night now spoke in clarity, each syllable vibrating in Johann's skull, threatening to unravel his sanity. "Don't cease to survive," the figure intoned, its voice echoing as though coming from multiple directions at once. Yet survival is meaningless without understanding. San is not merely a curse, it is judgment. Those who disturb the symbols are marked. Those who seek to evade its reach are tested. Johann's mind raced. Understanding. How could understanding save them from this relentless nightmare? Every corner of Valdres had conspired against them. Every shadow had become a hunter, and now this figure claimed authority over the forces they could barely comprehend. Laura clutched Johann's arm, whispering, "We can't fight it. We barely understand what it is." He shook his head. "We don't have the luxury of fear. We have to act, or it will claim us both." The figure took a slow step forward, staff tapping the stone floor in a deliberate rhythm, each strike resonating through the crypt, like a drumbeat of doom. With each strike, the shadows along the walls elongated, stretching and writhing as though feeding on the tension, twisting into forms that resembled the missing townsfolk. Faces pressed against the darkness, mouths open in silent screams, reaching toward them with impossible angles and appendages. Johann's stomach churned, but he forced himself to focus. Panic could kill faster than San ever could. The figure stopped, raising the staff high, and the glow of the sand symbol intensified, casting a sickly green light across the crypt. Johann felt a pull, magnetic and irresistible, as though the very essence of the curse was calling to him, seeking to embed itself into his soul. Laura gasped, stumbling back. "It's trying to mark you," she whispered, terror-stricken. Johann shook his head violently, resisting the compulsion with every ounce of willpower he possessed. Sweat ran down his brow, and his heart pounded in his ears. He realized that this was no ordinary curse. It demanded acknowledgement, submission, or rebellion. Survival required more than hiding. It required understanding and confronting the judgment. A sudden noise shattered the tense standoff, a crashing sound from above, followed by muffled cries. Shadows recoiled, hissing as if enraged by the intrusion. The figure's attention shifted momentarily toward the source, giving Johann and Laura a fleeting opportunity. Without a word, they bolted, darting through the twisting corridors of the crypt, the stone walls seeming to close in around them. Each step echoed unnaturally, and every corner revealed more shadows, their forms shifting in grotesque patterns. Some resembled human figures frozen mid-movement. Others were elongated and distorted, a tapestry of torment etched into darkness. They found themselves in a secondary chamber, smaller, cramped, and lined with shelves of crumbling tomes. Johann scanned the room, desperate for a clue, a weapon or some aid against the relentless presence pursuing them. His fingers brushed over the spines of ancient books, many written in languages long forgotten. One tome, bound in dark leather, bore the symbol of San on its cover, intricate and pulsating faintly with the same green light he had seen on the staff. He opened it carefully, revealing pages filled with archaic script, interspersed with diagrams that resembled the patterns they had seen etched into stones across the town. This might explain it," Johann whispered, flipping through the page. Laura leaned close, eyes wide as she traced the diagrams with her finger. "It's a record," she murmured, "of all who were taken before, of those who were tested and failed. It's centuries old." Johann nodded. Each entry was meticulous, noting the time, the victim, and the circumstances surrounding their disappearance. The final lines were always the same: "San judges, and those found wanting are claimed. Only the resolute may endure." He realized with a chill that their current predicament was the continuation of a legacy, a night repeating across generations, orchestrated by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Johann's breath came out in visible clouds, and the shadows along the walls writhed, creeping closer. Laura shivered. "They know we're here. They know we've touched the record." Johann grabbed her hand, pulling her toward a narrow passage, partially concealed behind a collapsed wall. The passage led downward, deeper into the bowels of the cathedral. Damp and suffocating, the walls were slick with moisture, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The whispers followed them, now a chorus of voices, some pleading, others mocking, all echoing the same ominous refrain. Sans sea. As they descended, the passage opened into a vast cavern beneath the cathedral, illuminated by an otherworldly green glow, emanating from crystals embedded in the walls. The floor was uneven, littered with debris and skeletal remains of those who had ventured too far. The symbol of San was etched repeatedly into the stone, forming a labyrinthine pattern that seemed to pulse with life. Johann realized with dawning horror that they had entered the heart of the curse, a place where the boundary between the living and the judgment of San was thin. From the shadows, movement stirred, figures emerged, their forms humanoid but twisted, shrouded in darkness that absorbed light. Their eyes glowed faintly, green as the crystals, and they advanced silently, surrounding Johann and Lelora. Johann gripped the branch he carried like a weapon, though he knew it was nearly useless against these entities. Lelora pressed close to him, murmuring prayers she barely remembered from childhood, words meant to invoke protection, though their efficacy was uncertain in this cursed domain. One of the figures stepped forward, slightly taller, staff in hand, and the symbols on its robes pulsed in time with the crystals. Johann recognized immediately that this was the same robed figure they had encountered earlier, the one commanding the shadow. Its gaze met Johann's, and the air between them vibrated with an unnatural force, compelling him to speak, to confess, or perhaps to submit. He realized that the curse was not blind. It sought understanding, acknowledgement of transgressions, or proof of courage. Johann took a deep breath, focusing on his own survival and Lelora's. He stepped forward slightly, raising his voice, though it trembled with fear. We do not understand fully, but we will endure. We will face what you demand." The figure paused, and the shadows seemed to hesitate. A low hum resonated through the cavern, vibrating through Johann's bones. Slowly, the figure extended its staff toward the nearest wall, and an image appeared in the green light, a vision of the town centuries ago, families mocked, those who had failed, and the cycle of judgment repeating with each generation. "Everything San has claimed," Johann nodded. "It's a warning and a test." The figure's presence pressed closer, and Johann felt an overwhelming compulsion to kneel, to surrender. But he resisted. If they surrendered, they would be They had to endure, to survive through courage and resolve. Hours or perhaps eternities passed in the cavern. Shadows twisted and writhed, moving in patterns that both disoriented and threatened. Johann and Lelora navigated the maze of etched symbols, guided by instinct, and by the subtle shifts in the shadows. Occasionally, whispers would reveal clues, some cryptic, others painfully direct, forcing them to make impossible choices: move left or right, climb or descend, trust instinct, or the faint guidance of the symbols themselves. Each choice carried consequence. Misstep, and the shadows would close in, claiming the unwary instantly. At last, they reached a chamber unlike any other, circular and massive, with a domed ceiling covered in intricate carvings of the sand symbol. At its center lay a pedestal with a single crystal, glowing with intensity far greater than those along the cavern walls. Johann approached cautiously, sensing that this crystal represented the heart of the curse, its source, the focal point of San's judgment. As he neared, the shadows recoiled, and the robed figure stepped aside, allowing him access. Johann glanced at Lelora, whose eyes reflected the same mixture of fear and resolve that he felt. Together, they understood that this was their moment, their opportunity to confront the force that had hunted and terrorized generations. As his fingers brushed its surface, a surge of energy coursed through him, visions flashing in his mind. The town, the missing, the shadows, and the countless victims of pain and understanding intertwined. He felt centuries of judgment and expectation, the weight of every decision, every failure, every life claimed. The whispers coalesced into a single voice,
clear and demanding. Prove your resolve, or be claimed. With a deep shuddering breath, Johann met the gaze of the robed figure and the shadows gripping the crystal with determination. The cavern seemed to shudder, the walls quaking, light and shadow dancing violently across the surface. Johann and Lalora had entered the heart of Sand's judgment, and their test, the ultimate trial of courage, understanding and survival, was only beginning. The moment Johann's fingers touched the crystal, a surge of energy rattled through the cavern, shaking the very stone beneath their feet. Lalora clutched his arm, her knuckles white, as a wave of light radiated from the crystal in rippling pulses. The shadows that had surrounded them twisted violently, writhing as though the air itself had become alive. Johann felt the pressure of centuries bearing down on him, a weight of uncountable victims, each scream echoing in his mind with horrifying clarity. The whispers, once fragmented and confusing, now merged into a chorus, chanting in rhythms that seemed to pierce directly into his thoughts. San watches, San judges, San claims. For a moment the cavern was silent save for the hum of the crystal. Johann's breath came in ragged gasps. As he tried to steady himself, he felt the crystal pulling at him, urging him forward, demanding understanding, demanding acknowledgement. He realized with sudden clarity that survival would not come from hiding, nor from fleeing. It would come from confronting the curse, accepting its judgment, and proving resolve. He turned to Lalora, whose eyes were wide with fear but also a growing spark of determination. "We have to endure this," he whispered. "There is no other way." The robed figure, staff still glowing with the sand symbol, stepped closer and the shadows recoiled slightly, as though respecting some unspoken rule. The figure's voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the chamber. "To survive, San, is to face the truth within yourself. The night demands courage and the heart of understanding. Only the resolute shall see the dawn." Johann swallowed hard, feeling the weight of those words settle over him. This was more than a curse. It was a test of spirit, mind and will. He focused on the crystal, closing his eyes, and let memories of the town, the missing townsfolk, and the whispers of the past flood through him. He felt the despair of those who had come before, the terror of those claimed, and the injustice of those lost without understanding. And then, as he centered himself, a strange clarity emerged. The sand symbol was not merely a mark of death. It was a key, a message, a challenge. It demanded recognition of the cycles of fear, secrecy, and greed that had allowed the curse to persist across centuries. Johann opened his eyes, and the green glow of the crystal intensified. The shadows recoiled further, and the robed figure lowered its staff slightly, observing. Lalora stepped closer, her hand brushing Johann's shoulder. "What do we do?" she whispered. Johann's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "We acknowledge it, we accept the judgment, but we do not surrender to fear. We show courage." Together, they stepped forward, pressing their hands against the crystal. A shock of energy surged through them, and the cavern seemed to dissolve into swirling patterns of light and shadow. Visions assaulted Johann's mind. He saw the town of Valdres centuries ago, families marked, lives disrupted, secrets buried. He saw those who had fled, or defied the curse, only to be claimed in the end. And then he saw himself, and Lalora, tiny flickers of life against the vastness of the judgment, but unyielding, refusing to submit complete. The whispers now spoke with clarity, repeating a phrase that resonated deep within his soul. Resolve, understanding, courage. Only the resolute endure. Suddenly, the shadows erupted in motion, swirling around them like a vortex. Forms emerged from the darkness, humanoid yet grotesque, each one a reflection of the victims San had claimed over the centuries. Johann and Lalora instinctively stepped back, but the crystal's light enveloped them, forming a protective aura that pushed the shadows at. The robed figure moved to stand between them, and the vortex, staff raised, but did not attack. Instead, it spoke again, its voice both commanding and approving. "You walk the path few have dared. You face the trial without succumbing to fear. The curse watches and judges, but it also recognizes resilience. The shadows surged closer, hissing, twisting, forming grotesque shapes that seemed intent on overwhelming them. Johann gritted his teeth, focusing on the crystal, on the pulsing light, on the understanding that this was the heart of Sand's judgment. With every step forward, the shadows receded slightly, though they never vanished entirely. It became clear that the curse sought not to destroy blindly, but to challenge, to test, to separate the resolute from the weak. Hours passed, or perhaps mere moments. Time had lost meaning. Johann and Laura moved together, guided by the crystal's glow and the whispers of understanding. They navigated the labyrinthine chamber beneath the cathedral, encountering more shadows and remnants of past victims. Some of these remnants were frighteningly familiar: clothing, jewelry, and trinkets that had belonged to townsfolk now long gone. The weight of centuries pressed upon them, a reminder of the many who had failed before. Yet with each step, their resolve strengthened. Eventually, they reached a chamber where the shadows paused, forming a ring around a central platform. Atop it was a large, intricately carved stone, pulsating with the same green light as the crystal. The sand symbol etched upon it was massive, each line sharp and precise, radiating power and ancient authority. Johann understood instinctively that this stone was the source, the core of the judgment, the center of the curse itself. Laura's hand found his, and together they approached, aware that this was the pivotal moment. As they stepped onto the platform, the robed figure raised its staff high, and the crystal's light intensified, bathing the chamber in an almost blinding glow. The shadows writhed violently, pressing against the boundaries of the light, but unable to penetrate it fully. The whispers became a chorus, chanting with an intensity that made Johann's head spin. Then a vision unfolded before them: the history of Sand's curse, the origins of the symbol, and the ancient society that had first created it to enforce judgment and maintain control over the town. They saw the cycles of greed, betrayal, and violence that had perpetuated the curse, and understood that the key to surviving lay not in defiance, but in acknowledgement of the truths buried for centuries. Johann stepped forward, placing both hands firmly on the pulsating stone. Laura did the same, her presence steadying him. A surge of energy coursed through them, powerful enough to lift them slightly off their feet. The shadows hissed and recoiled, the whispers now a singular voice, speaking directly into their minds. Resolve, courage, understanding. Only those who embrace these may endure. Johann felt his fears, doubts, and despair coalesce and dissipate, replaced with a clarity and determination he had never known. Laura mirrored him, their shared resolve forming a bond that seemed to resonate with the very essence of Sand's judgment. The robed figure lowered its staff, watching in silence. The shadows, sensing the change, writhed one last time, then gradually retreated into the corners of the chamber. The pulsating light of the stone softened, and the cavern seemed to breathe, the oppressive weight of centuries lifting slightly. Johann and Laura, trembling and exhausted, realized they had passed the first true test of Sand's judgment. They had endured without surrendering to fear, confronted the essence of the curse, and survived. But survival was only the beginning. Johann knew, deep in his bones, that the curse was patient, ancient, and relentless. The night was far from over, and the lessons of Sand had only begun to reveal themselves. Yet in this moment, amidst the green glow and fading whispers, they found a sliver of hope, a realization that courage, understanding, and resolve might indeed offer a path through the darkness. Together, they prepared to face whatever came next, knowing that the trials ahead would demand every ounce of strength, every shred of will, and the deepest reserves of human courage. The cavern fell silent, save for the soft hum of the crystal and the distant echo of the bell above, marking a time that no longer followed mortal understanding. Johann and Laura took each other's hands, stepping carefully toward the next passage, their eyes fixed on the shadows ahead, ready to confront whatever horrors awaited in the depths of Sand's ancient, unyielding judgment.
The passage ahead was narrower than any they had encountered, carved from the living rock beneath the cathedral, damp and slick with condensation that made each step precarious. Johann and Leora moved cautiously, their hands brushing the jagged walls, feeling the vibrations of something ancient thrumming beneath their feet. The green glow of the crystal behind them dimmed as it advanced, yet Johann could still feel its influence, like an invisible tether, connecting them to the heart of Sand's judgment. Every whisper that reached them now was sharper, more insistent, as though the curse itself were anticipating their next move. The air grew colder, biting at their lungs, and every breath seemed to echo in the narrow corridor. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, contorting into grotesque shapes that appeared almost human in form, their faces twisted with fear and malice. Johann felt a shiver run down his spine, a deep primal warning. Yet he pressed on. Leora's grip on his arm tightened, her knuckles white, and he could feel the trembling in her body. They both knew there was no turning back. The curse had marked them, and Valdres itself seemed to have folded in on itself, leaving them alone in the labyrinth of Sand's making. As they turned a sharp corner, the corridor opened into a vast chamber. The walls were covered in faded murals, depicting the history of the town centuries ago, markets bustling with life, families gathering, and in the background faint representations of the Sand symbol, subtle yet ominous. Johann could make out faces of the ancestors of the townsfolk who had disappeared, their expressions frozen in joy, terror, and anguish. In the center of the chamber lay a massive pit, its edges crumbling, and from within it came an eerie green light, pulsing rhythmically like a heartbeat. Shadows seemed to crawl from the pit, reaching outward, their forms fluid and sinister. A sudden scream pierced the air, high-pitched and frantic, echoing through the chamber. Johann and Leora froze. The sound was human, but distorted, as if it had been stretched and twisted by the curse. From the depths of the pit, figures emerged, humans, or what once had been human, faces hollow, eyes glowing with an unnatural green light, moving with jerky, unnatural motions. Johann recognized them immediately. The missing townsfolk, now transformed, claimed by San and bound to the curse. Their mouths opened, silent screams emitting vibrations that rattled the stone floor, and they advanced slowly toward Johann and Leora, relentless and merciless. Leora pulled Johann back, her voice trembling. "We can't fight them. They're not fully alive." Johann shook his head, adrenaline surging. "We survive by understanding, by moving carefully. Don't panic." They backed toward the far side of the chamber, searching for an escape, but the walls seemed to stretch infinitely, the pit widening, trapping them in the center. Shadows flickered along the murals, forming faces that mimicked the expressions of the trapped figures, mocking them, pressing in from every direction. The whispers were deafening now, urging them to surrender, to give themselves to Sand's judgment. But Johann gritted his teeth and resisted. A flicker of movement, near the pit's edge, caught Johann's eye. Something or someone was attempting to climb out. A young boy, no older than 10, thin and pale, eyes wide with terror, emerged shakily, his small hands grasping the edge. He stumbled and fell back, but Johann lunged, catching him just before he plunged into the abyss. The boy's lips trembled as he whispered a name Johann had never heard. "San, no." His body convulsed, and for a moment, Johann feared he would be claimed too. But slowly, the child's eyes cleared, and he stared at Johann and Leora, a spark of recognition, fear and relief in his gaze. Johann realized they were not alone in their struggle. Others had survived this night so far, perhaps fewer than 10, scattered and trembling, each one marked, yet defiant. Leora whispered, "We need to lead them, guide them." Johann nodded.
We need to reach the source of this, to confront it, or we'll all be claimed. The group gathered, silent but attentive, their fear palpable, yet their will to survive burning fiercely in their eyes. From the shadows, the robed figure appeared again, its staff glowing, eyes fixed on them. The figures in the pit recoiled slightly, sensing the authority, yet they did not retreat fully. Johann could feel the tension, a standoff between those bound by San and those who dared confront it. The figure's voice resonated in the chamber. You have endured thus far. Few possess the courage to confront the judgment of San, yet endurance alone is insufficient. You must prove understanding, must show the essence of resolve, or be claimed as all before you have been. The ground trembled violently as the shadows surged, the figures from the pit, lurching forward. Johann and the survivors back toward a narrow passage on the far side, the only path visible through the shifting green light. Leora's hand gripped his arm tightly, and he could feel her fear mirrored in every heartbeat. As they moved, the shadows twisted, forming grotesque barriers, and the whispers became a chorus of accusation, dragging at their minds with memories of failure, greed, and past sin. Johann remembered the ancient tome they had found in the crypt, the record of the curse, and its history. The instructions, cryptic though they were, suggested that confronting the heart of San required acknowledgement of the past, acceptance of judgment, and unwavering resolve. Johann gathered the scattered survivors, urging them to focus, to understand, not merely to flee. They formed a small circle, hands joined, murmuring words of recognition for the curse, for those lost, and for the truths buried over centuries. Slowly, a faint pulse of light radiated outward from their joined hands, a fragile barrier against the encroaching shadows. The robed figure raised its staff, and the pit's light flared violently, throwing the chamber into blinding illumination. The shadows recoiled, twisting violently, yet the circle of survivors remained steadfast. Johann could feel the energy of San's judgment pressing against them, probing, testing, seeking weakness, but their resolve held. Leora's voice rose above the whispers, firm and commanding, as she repeated the ancient words she barely understood, invoking courage, understanding, and acknowledgement. The green light of the pit shimmered, then stabilized, responding to their collective words. Suddenly, one of the figures in the pit, the twisted form of a young woman, who had disappeared earlier in the night, reached upward, her elongated fingers stretching toward the ceiling. She shrieked, a sound of rage and despair, and then froze, staring directly at Johann. Her eyes, now partially human again, reflected recognition and plea. Johann realized the curse could be mitigated, if not fully undone, by facing the truth of each victim, by acknowledging their suffering, and the patterns that allowed San to persist. The figure's form stabilized, then began to sink back into the pit, not in defeat, but in release. Encouraged, Johann guided the other survivors in the same recognition, whispering names, recounting memories, acknowledging the lives claimed. Each act of understanding sent a ripple through the chamber, weakening the shadows, and stabilizing the pulsing light. The robed figure observed silently, staff lowered slightly, as if approving their actions, testing their ability to endure and comprehend the breadth of San's hours, or perhaps centuries passed, as they moved through the chamber, confronting each figure, each shadow, acknowledging the past, and refusing to succumb to fear. The pit gradually receded, the green light dimming to a soft glow, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. The chamber itself seemed to breathe, walls relaxing, murals brightening faintly, as if the town itself recognized the courage of those who survived. Johann and Leora, though exhausted and battered, stood taller, eyes fixed on the far side of the chamber, knowing that the next trial awaited. And then, from the far end, a massive door materialized, etched with the San symbol, more elaborate than any they had seen. Johann knew instinctively that beyond it lay the core of the judgment, the final confrontation with the force that had haunted Valdres for centuries. The survivors gathered behind him, forming a small but resolute group, ready to face whatever awaited beyond that threshold. The robed figure stood silently to the side, watching, the staff's light dimming, as though signaling that the moment of reckoning had arrived. Johann took a deep breath, gripping Leora's hand. The whispers had faded, replaced with a quiet understanding that the final trial was near. Every step forward, every decision, had led to this point. They would confront San itself, the curse that had claimed so many lives, the judgment that had persisted for centuries. And for the first time, Johann felt something he had not felt all night. Hope, fragile but undeniable, that survival, and perhaps redemption was within reach. The massive door at the far end of the chamber loomed before them, the San symbol etched into its surface glowing faintly, pulsating like a heartbeat. Johann could feel the energy radiating from it, a dense, almost suffocating power that seemed alive, aware, and deeply ancient. Leora's hand squeezed his, grounding him in the reality of the moment. The survivors behind them were tense, but resolute, their eyes reflecting the flickering light of the chamber, and a mixture of terror and determination. Johann took a deep breath, and stepped forward, leading them toward the door. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself resisted their approach. The robed figure remained silent to their side, staff lowered, eyes following their movement like a sentinel judging their readiness. Johann's mind raced, recalling every lesson from the crypt, the cavern, and the pit. The curse of San was not merely about punishment, it was about confrontation, acknowledgement, and resilience. The door represented the core of judgment, and beyond it lay the truth of the curse, its origin, and the ultimate test. With a trembling hand, Johann reached out and pressed against the door. The green light flared, blinding him for a moment, and then the door slowly swung inward, with a deep resonant groan. Beyond it was a chamber unlike any they had seen. Vast, circular expanse, walls lined with mirrors, each reflecting a distorted image of themselves, multiplied infinitely. The floor was covered with the San symbol, etched deep into stone, glowing with a pulsating green light that seemed to respond to their presence. The air was thick with whispers, now clear and forceful, echoing around them. Face yourself, face the judgment, endure, or be claimed. Johann realized immediately that this was not merely a physical confrontation, but a psychological and spiritual trial. The mirrors showed them their fears, their doubts, every hesitation, every failure, exaggerated and twisted. Leora's reflection screamed silently, a look of terror frozen on her face. Johann's own image twisted and shifted, showing him as a shadow, consumed by fear, kneeling before an invisible judgment. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, urging them to succumb. But Johann forced himself to focus. It's a test, he whispered to Leora. We endure it together, we acknowledge it, but we do not surrender. She nodded, her grip firm, and together they stepped further into the mirrored chamber. Each step caused the reflections to shift, reacting to their resolve. Shadows emerged from the corners, taking the forms of loved ones, enemies, and even themselves, at their weakest moments, all reaching for them, clawing, twisting, trying to break their concentration. The robed figure moved to the center of the chamber, staff raised, chanting in the ancient tongue of San. The mirrors pulsed in response, and suddenly, the chamber seemed to expand, the reflections multiplying, surrounding them complete. Johann could see the victims of the curse, throughout history, trapped in the mirrors, their eyes pleading for acknowledgement, for release. He understood. The curse fed, not on fear alone, but on ignorance and denial. Recognition, understanding, and resolve were the only weapons they had. Johann began speaking aloud, naming the victims, acknowledging their suffering, recounting what he had seen in the murals, the crypts, and the pit. Leora joined him, her voice steady despite the terror surrounding. The shadows shrieked and writhed as the echoes of their voices filled the chamber. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, the mirror's images began to change. The twisted, screaming reflections softened, the faces became human, the eyes clear. The whispers shifted, from demand to acknowledgement. You see, you understand, you endure. The chamber shook violently as the robed figure struck the staff against the floor. The symbols of San on the floor and walls glowed intensely, forming a vortex of light and shadow around them. The shadows from the mirrors surged forward, merging into a single colossal form, a towering figure, dark and immense, eyes glowing with green fire, limbs elongated and fluid, embodying the judgment of San itself. Its voice rumbled, echoing through every corner of the chamber, resonating deep in their bones. You have come far. Few survive this far. Do you have the resolve to face the essence of San? Johann felt the weight of the centuries pressing on him, fear clawing at his mind, yet he forced himself to stand tall. We face you, he shouted, voice steady, not in fear, but with understanding. We acknowledge the past, the suffering, and the judgment, but we will endure. Leora's voice joined his, firm and unwavering. We will not surrender. We face the truth, and we confront it together. The colossal figure surged forward, shadows lashing out like serpents, seeking to envelop and consume them. Johann and Leora held their ground, focusing on each other, on the crystal's lessons, on the understanding that resolve and courage were their shield. As the shadows struck, the reflections in the mirrors multiplied, forming a protective lattice around them, each reflection acting as a tether between their will and the curse. The figure roared, a sound like grinding stone and thunder, yet their resolve did not waver. One by one, the echoes of victims trapped in the mirrors began to emerge, stepping from the reflections into the chamber. They were spectral at first, shimmering with green light, then solidifying into human form. Each stepped forward, acknowledging Johann and Leora, lending their strength to the circle of resolve. Johann realized that the curse of San, while ancient and relentless, could be countered by acknowledgement, courage and unity. The victims, once lost, became allies in this confrontation, their collective will forming a shield against the judgment itself. The colossal form shrieked and surged, lashing its shadowy limbs, but the combined strength of Johann, Leora, and the spectral allies pushed back. Light from the San symbols on the floor pulsed, synchronized with the rhythm of their courage. The robed figure watched silently, staff lowered, observing the test unfold. Slowly, the figure of San's essence began to fracture, cracks appearing in the shifting shadows, light piercing through, revealing the truth beneath the terror, a force of judgment and history, but not invincible, not beyond human resolve. Johann realized that the final act required more than courage. It required sacrifice and understanding. He glanced at Leora, who nodded in silent comprehension. Together, they stepped into the heart of the chamber, joining hands, and focused on the crystal's light, channeling every ounce of resolve, every understanding of the past, every act of acknowledgement they had performed. The colossal shadow writhed violently, screaming, but the circle of light and courage held. The spectral figures of the victims joined in, a chorus of voices and wills, each one reinforcing the barrier against the curse. The chamber shook violently, the mirrors cracking and shattering as light exploded from the crystal. Shadows twisted, shrieked and then fragmented, dissolving into the air. The colossal figure of San's essence reeled, then collapsed, dissolving into nothingness. The green light dimmed, fading to a soft glow. The chamber calmed for the first time in centuries. Johann and Leora stood amidst the remnants of shattered mirrors, breathing heavily, their hands still clasped, surrounded by the survivors and the spectral allies, who now smiled with relief and recognition. The robed figure approached, staff lowered, and spoke one final time, voice solemn, yet approving. You have endured the judgment of San. Few have shown the courage and understanding required. The curse is broken. Its cycles ended for now, and those who survived are free. But remember, the Night Watchers and history remembers. Courage and resolve must be preserved. Then the figure faded, leaving only the echoes of its words and the soft green glow of the chamber. Johann and Leora looked around at the survivors, the spectral eyes slowly fading into peace, and felt a weight lift from their hearts. The trial was over, the curse confronted, and for the first time, Valdres seemed quiet, almost alive with relief. The lessons of San, the understanding of judgment, and the courage to face the unknown had endured. They had survived, and the night's horrors were behind them, for now, leaving only the knowledge that vigilance, courage and resolve would always be required in the face of darkness.
The aftermath of the confrontation with Sand's essence left the chamber eerily silent, the broken mirrors reflecting faint green light from the remnants of the crystal. Johann and Leora stood in the center, exhausted yet resolute, surrounded by the survivors and the fading echoes of those once claimed by the curse. The weight of centuries seemed to have lifted, but the air still carried the memory of whispers, the distant echo of judgment, reminding them that while the immediate danger had passed, the legacy of Sand remained. Johann breathed deeply, feeling the tension ease slightly, yet he knew the journey was far from over. "Are we really free?" Leora asked softly, her voice trembling. Johann nodded slowly, glancing around at the other survivors, their faces etched with relief, fear and the lingering trauma of the night. "For now," he said, "we've broken the cycle tonight, but the curse is ancient. It has a memory, and it watches. We need to leave, and we need to remember everything." The survivors began to move, cautiously navigating through the shattered chamber and the corridor that led back toward the crypts. Each step felt heavy with reflection, the silence broken only by the occasional creak of stone and the soft murmur of those processing the horrors they had endured. As they ascended the narrow passage back to the cathedral above, Johann noticed the subtle changes around them. The shadows that had once writhed violently along the walls were now stationary, mere silhouettes frozen in time, and the oppressive chill in the air had lessened, replaced by a cold but tolerable draft. The murals along the walls, once distorted with fear and torment, now showed faint glimpses of normal life, people gathering in markets, children playing, the town alive with activity. It was as if Valdre itself had begun to heal, the echoes of the past being rewritten by courage and acknowledgement. When they finally emerged into the main hall of the cathedral, the night outside had begun to shift. The green glow from the crystal faded completely, leaving only the natural moonlight filtering through the broken stained glass. The town of Valdres lay silent, bathed in a pale silver glow. The weight of centuries' worth of fear lifted slightly, yet a quiet unease lingered in the air. Johann looked at Leora, her eyes reflecting both relief and lingering terror. "We did it," he whispered, "at least for now. The judgment has passed, and the curse has been confronted." Leora nodded, but a shadow of doubt lingered in her gaze. "Do you think it will return?" Johann paused, feeling the ancient weight of the curse in the silence. "Not tonight," he said cautiously, "but San is patient. History remembers, and it will always test the resolution." The survivors began to disperse cautiously, moving toward the edges of the town, some whispering names of loved ones lost, others recounting fragments of the ordeal. Johann and Leora lingered, drawn to the remnants of the cathedral, the shattered mirrors, and the faint echoes of the crystals. There was a profound stillness here, a fragile peace, and yet the memory of the horrors, the twisted shadows, the whispers, the faces of the lost, remained indelibly etched in their minds. Johann realized that survival had come not through escape, but through understanding and confrontation, through the courage to face the unknown, and the patience to endure the judgment of centuries. The moonlight caught upon a patch of the old cobblestones, illuminating faint symbols etched centuries ago, long hidden beneath layers of dirt and moss. Johann knelt, brushing away the debris, revealing the sand symbol, faint yet unmistakable. Leora's eyes wide. "It's still here," she murmured. Johann nodded. "Yes, but it's weakened. Tonight we have shown that courage, resolve, and acknowledgement can stand against it, but the mark remains, the lesson endures." He traced the symbol with his fingers, feeling the subtle energy still present, not malevolent, but waiting, watching, as if the town itself had become a guardian of the past, a reminder that vigilance was necessary even in peace. The survivors regrouped, near the outskirts, sharing quiet words of reassurance, comforting one another, and beginning the slow process of reconciling the night's horrors. Among them, the young boy they had rescued from the pit clung to Leora, his eyes wide but alive, a small beacon of hope. Johann realized that the legacy of San, while terrifying and relentless, had also forged bonds among the survivors, teaching them the value of courage, unity, and memory. Those who endured carried not only their own strength, but the history of countless others, a chain of resilience stretching across centuries. The town of Valdres itself seemed to breathe differently, as though the cycle of fear and judgment had been interrupted. Johann and Leora walked together through the empty streets, the sound of their footsteps echoing against the centuries-old stone buildings. The air was crisp, carrying faint scents of earth and old timber, a reminder that life, though fragile, continued. Yet in every shadow and every flicker of moonlight, Johann could feel the watchful presence of the curse, not aggressive, but patient, as if waiting for the next test, the next generation to confront its judgment. As dawn approached, the first light of the rising sun spilled across the town, softening the darkness and revealing Valdres in a new gentle clarity. Johann stopped at the edge of the town square, looking back toward the cathedral, now silent and still, its doors closed, its chambers empty save for memories and lessons etched into the stone. Leora stood beside him, her hand in his, and together they watched as the sun painted the town in warm hues, a fragile promise of renewal. They had endured, faced the essence of San, and survived against a curse that had spanned centuries. Yet Johann knew the truth. The night, and the judgment it carried, was eternal in memory, and the courage required to face it must be remembered by all who survived. The survivors began to disperse, carrying with them the stories of the night, the warnings and lessons learned. Johann and Leora lingered a moment longer, reflecting on the journey, the crypt, the pit, the mirrored chamber, and the confrontation with the essence of San. Each step had tested their resolve, each shadow had demanded acknowledgement, and each act of courage had forged a path through the ancient judgment. Johann realized that survival was not merely escaping the curse, but understanding it, recognizing its lessons, and facing it with unwavering determination. Behind them the streets of Valdres were silent, yet alive with the memory of those who had endured, those who had been lost, and those who had witnessed the judgment of San. They knew the curse's presence would always linger, a reminder of the fragile balance between fear, courage, and understanding. But they also knew that the night, though dark and relentless, had been faced, and that the resolute could endure, survive, and carry forward the lessons of history. As they disappeared into the morning light, Johann glanced back one last time at the cathedral, its silhouette etched against the rising sun. The shadows within had been confronted, the judgment faced, and for now the curse of San had been mitigated. But the memory, the whispers, and the legacy of courage would remain, a warning and a guide for all who would come after. The night had ended, but the story of San, of Valdres, and of the courage required to survive, would endure, across time, a testament to the power of resolve, understanding, and the human spirit against the relentless shadow of history. As the first light of dawn touched the town of Valdres, Johann and Leora walked away from the shadows that had haunted them for centuries. The curse of San had been confronted, its judgment endured, and yet the memory of the night lingered, a reminder that courage, understanding, and resolve are the only shields against the dark. The survivors carried the lessons forward, their hearts marked, not by fear, but by the strength of endurance. Remember, every shadow has a story, every whisper holds a secret, and the night watches for those who dare to face it. Will you have the courage to confront what lies unseen? The story of San reminds us that history never forgets, and bravery echoes across generations. If you enjoyed this journey through mystery, courage, and the unknown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a tale that chills the bones and ignites the imagination. The night is long, but the truth awaits.